Welcome to the Twin Labs podcast, where we help you make better decisions using AI and digital twins. For the better part of the last century, organizational culture, especially in the boardrooms and strategy sessions of the West, has operated under this single sort of non-negotiable principle.
Right. That the quality of a decision is directly proportional to the time you spend on it.
Exactly. The more time, the more data you throw at it, the better the decision must be. We're just, conditioned to think that exhaustive deliberation means diligence.
And that speed is reckless.
Speed is absolutely reckless. But what if that whole foundational assumption is, well, what if it's flawed? What if the ability to make these instant, powerful judgments is actually the pinnacle of expertise?
And that right there, that fundamental challenge to the status quo, is the core thesis of our deep dive today. We're going to be leveraging the insights from Malcolm Gladwell's landmark book, Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking.
A fantastic book.
It really is. It's this synthesis of scientific research and really decades of anecdotal evidence that argues for a truly revolutionary idea, that choices made in a flash, in a blink of an eye, are not only sometimes better, but often more reliable than the ones we make after painstaking month-long data-saturated analysis.
So our mission today is to go, way beyond just celebrating intuition.
Yeah.
I think we need to really dissect the mechanics of it, of this rapid cognition, understand precisely why it can be so successful. And maybe most critically for everyone listening, we have to expose its profound vulnerabilities. Because the blink, it's not always your friend.
Not at all.
For any executive trying to navigate a world that is just drowning in data, understanding this cognitive system isn't optional anymore. It's essential for what you might call optimal decision hygiene.
Absolutely. So we'll start by establishing the foundational science, what Gladwell calls thin slicing, and the adaptive unconscious. Then we'll dive into some pretty dramatic successes of trained intuition, and this reveals a really powerful insight about the principle of frugality.
That less is often more.
Less is truly more. After that, we need to spend some dedicated time on the critical failure modes, how bias and stress can completely corrupt the system.
And then we bring it home.
We'll deliver 4 specific action-oriented strategies that decision makers can implement, really immediately, to educate, control, and optimize their own blink moments.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this engine of instant judgments. If we're going to start placing trust in decisions made in a flash, we really need to understand the underlying infrastructure. We need to know what's firing that system.
Absolutely. We're talking about rapid cognition, and it relies on 2 core mechanisms that operate, way below the level of conscious effort. The first one is what Gladwell popularized as thin slicing.
Thin slicing.
Yeah. This is the inherent, really sophisticated human capacity to extract highly reliable, significant patterns from just minimal data. We're talking about gleaning deep, predictive insight from a tiny sliver of experience, a few seconds of a conversation, a brief glance at a document.
Or even just the first note of a piece of music.
Exactly. I picture it as the ultimate form of forensic data analysis. You're not looking at the whole crime scene. You're instinctively locating that one key fingerprint, the one piece of highly salient, high-signal information that makes the entire puzzle just click into place. That is a perfect analogy. And the system that runs this massive, continuous filtering operation is what he calls the adaptive unconscious.
The adaptive unconscious.
Gladwell reframed this concept, seeing it as a massive parallel processing internal computer. It is constantly, quietly, and instantly processing all the knowledge, all the experiences, all the training you've accumulated over your entire lifetime.
So if our conscious mind is what they call system 2, the deliberate, effortful, slow-thinking part we use for complex math problems.
Right.
Then the adaptive unconscious is system 1. It's the lightning-fast, intuitive, automatic pilot. But it's really crucial to clarify, this isn't the old Freudian concept, right? We're not talking about some dark, murky place of repressed memories.
No, not in the least. And that Freudian interpretation is profoundly misleading in this context. The adaptive unconscious is extraordinarily sophisticated and highly functional. It's what allows you to drive a car, or navigate a crowded street, or recognize a familiar face without having to consciously calculate vectors or, cross-reference millions of memories.
It's essential for survival.
It is. It's essential for survival. And just for daily life, it's the part of you that is constantly sizing up the world, assessing risk, and flagging novelty before your conscious mind even fully processes the input.
But if this computer's always on, always performing these complex calculations, how can we reliably test it or measure what it's holding? because it feels almost inaccessible.
That's the paradox, isn't it? The data storage and the processing power of the adaptive unconscious are immense, but its output is just an impression. It's a feeling or an automatic reaction. Psychologists estimate that our conscious mind processes about, say, 40 pieces of information per second.
Okay, 40?
The unconscious adaptive system, it's processing up to 11 million pieces of information per second.
Wow, 11 million.
It's a phenomenal filtering mechanism built through evolution to take this torrential downpour of reality and distill it down to a handful of critical, actionable variables.
So if the human brain is evolutionarily built to instantly filter those massive inputs down to the core, essential data points for rapid action, that should inform, well, every single thing we do in decision support technology today.
What's so fascinating is that direct structural parallel to modern data science and the concept of digital twins. When decision makers face information overload, their cognitive function degrades. It just does.
It shuts down.
Right. So understanding how the human mind instinctively thin slices this large-scale reality, it helps us develop better technological filters. At Twin Labs, our core challenge when designing complex data models, whether they're processing streaming data from operational digital twins or synthesizing market information, is exactly this.
To mirror that cognitive efficiency.
Precisely. To filter massive, often chaotic data sets down to the essential high-signal variables that truly influence the outcome. This is really where we fuse human expertise with machine speed.
So the goal isn't just about speed, it's about frugality. We want our external data systems to function with the same focus and efficiency as an expert's internal system one.
Exactly. We aim to leverage the machine's capacity to process all that volume while maintaining the expert human's discipline in filtering for the signal.
Let's move into the next segment then, the triumphs of this rapid cognition, because we have to make something really clear to you listening up front.
Yeah.
This isn't magic. A blink moment is only reliable if it's supported by something substantial, and that something is expertise.
Absolutely. I think this is the foundational insight of Blink. Reliable thin slicing is not some innate random talent. It is a highly learned skill. It's built on deep, often decades-long domain expertise and systematic, structured practice.
Right.
That depth of experience is what allows experts to build this immense internal database of patterns, which then grants them the unique, immediate ability to instantaneously filter out all the irrelevant noise and focus only on the handful of factors that truly matter in the split-second decision.
So expertise is the non-negotiable precondition.
Yeah.
If you don't have the database, your thin slice is just. It's just a guess. The classic case study here, which I think illustrates the power of trained intuition over institutional deliberation, is the story of the Getty Koros.
Oh, it's a perfect encapsulation of this difference between exhaustive analysis and pattern recognition. So this colossal statue, purportedly an ancient Greek artifact dating back 2,000 years, was acquired by the Getty Museum.
Right.
They spent 14 months and millions of dollars on due diligence. They brought in geologists to test the marble, lawyers to trace the provenance, conservationists to analyze the patina, the works.
The full court press.
The full court press. And the scientific conclusion based on all this objective, painstaking analysis was that the statue was genuine.
14 months of effort, thousands of pages of documentation, a massive investment of institutional time, and it all pointed to authenticity.
And then the world's leading art experts started arriving. They walked into the viewing room, they looked at the statue, and everything immediately changed.
What happened?
They experienced what was later described as an intuitive repulsion. These weren't scientists with lab equipment. These were men and women who had internalized the visual language of thousands of years of Greek sculpture. Their brains were the database.
So what were the specific signals they picked up on that all those exhaustive tests missed?
Well, the signals were subtle, intuitive, and almost impossible for them to articulate at first. The art historian Federico Zeri, a man who could supposedly date a painting just by the texture of the canvas, he felt uneasy about the style. Specifically, his gut, his unconscious, focused instinctively on the unnatural look of the statue's fingernails and the way the hair was treated.
The fingernails.
The fingernails. And then another expert, Thomas Hoving, recalled his first thought, this immediate, unbidden word that just popped into his head. Fresh.
Fresh. That's the opposite of what you want to feel about a 2,000-year-old marble artifact. That instant gut feeling, that high signal observation, that was the key.
That's exactly right. The scientific analysis focused on the material. The expert intuition focused on the style, The handwriting of the sculptor, the texture of the stone, the patina density, the tool marks, they instantly failed to align with the expert's vast internal database of genuine artifacts. And that intuitive judgment, formed in seconds, proved correct.
That statue was a forgery.
The statue was a forgery.
I think every executive needs to be asking themselves, what is the equivalent of fresh in my business? What is that subtle sign of instability or fraud or a weak business model that months of due diligence reports, the equivalent of the Getty scientific tests, will completely miss? Because that ability to spot the gist, the essence, as an ornithologist does when identifying a rare bird, that's what separates an experienced leader from a novice.
That ability to instantly spot the underlying pattern is the triumph of trained intuition. It's why the famous tennis coach Vic Braden could accurately predict a double fault before the player's racket even made contact with the ball.
He wasn't doing physics equations in his head.
No, not at all. He was relying on these unspoken, instinctive cues picked up from observing thousands and thousands of hours of human body language under pressure.
The lesson here is so clear. The more profoundly you know your domain, the faster and more reliably you can simplify complexity. And this leads us directly to the next triumph, the power of frugality. This is where Blank throws a direct challenge at that conventional wisdom that more information always equals better, safer results.
It argues, and I think quite forcefully, that frugality often outperforms exhaustive analysis. The sheer volume of incoming information can often lead to the opposite of clarity. It can result in analysis paralysis, actively confusing decision makers, and impairing accuracy, especially when you're under time pressure.
This is such a critical point for any modern executive who is just drowning in quarterly reports and data dashboards. You're telling us the effort to gather more data can actually be counterproductive.
Precisely. And the prime example Gladwell uses to demonstrate this is the revolutionary work of cardiologist Lee Goldman in emergency rooms.
Okay.
Traditionally, when a patient presented with chest pain, doctors were trained to gather exhaustive information, every test, every symptom, every possible data point, to assess the risk of a heart attack. This comprehensive traditional method often led to inconsistent and surprisingly inaccurate diagnoses.
With catastrophic consequences, I imagine.
Absolutely. But why did the data overwhelm the signal? What was the psychological phenomenon at play there?
The doctors, despite all their expertise, were being forced to weigh too many irrelevant variables. They were engaging their slow, deliberate System 2 thinking when they really needed the speed of System 1. The sheer complexity just introduced cognitive friction.
So Goldman decided to force frugality. He developed a minimal data algorithm that focused on only a handful of factors. Specifically, just 3 urgent, high-risk factors: unstable angina, fluid in the lungs, and systolic blood pressure below 100, and then he combined that with the ECG results.
Wait a minute, I have to ask, as the critical proxy for the listener, doesn't that present an ethical dilemma? You're ignoring known patient history like smoking or diabetes. Isn't that negligent?
And that's the critical insight. It really speaks to the genius of the algorithm. Goldman realized that while a history of smoking or diabetes is absolutely relevant for long-term care and preventative health,
Of course.
it was useless for the immediate high-stakes diagnosis of whether that patient was going to die right now. Worse than useless, actually. That extra data was actively harmful because it muddled the doctor's judgments. It diverted their focus from the 3 critical indicators that determined immediate risk.
So the minimal approach wasn't just faster. It was actually preventing cognitive decay caused by data noise. It forced the expert's thin slicing ability to focus exclusively on the signal. Wow. That's a powerful lesson in data discipline.
And this concept of focusing on high signal variables, it extends far beyond medicine. You can look at the work of psychologist Dr. John Gottman, whose method of marriage prediction is another cornerstone of this kind of research.
Right. Gottman's ability to predict divorce is almost legendary. He could observe a married couple interacting for just 15 minutes, a tiny, thin slice of their entire relationship history, and predict with 90% accuracy whether they would still be together 15 years down the road.
It's stunning.
That long-term predictive power from such a minimal observation is just stunning.
And his predictive power was achieved by ruthlessly prioritizing what to watch. He wasn't tracking minor disagreements about, who takes out the trash. He used a system called SPAF coding specific affect to categorize every microexpression in verbal exchange. But crucially, he distilled relationship pathology down to a handful of high-signal variables. He called them the four horsemen.
The four horsemen.
Yeah.
Defensiveness, stonewalling, criticism, and contempt.
And the most predictive factor of all, contempt.
Contempt, yeah. I think we can all picture that, can't we? That eye roll or the sarcastic dismissal. It's the visual equivalent of hitting the nuclear launch button on a marriage.
It is. It is the single greatest predictor of divorce because it conveys disgust and superiority. Gottman found that when one partner regularly expresses contempt through eye-rolling, sarcasm, subtle hostility, they are fundamentally attacking their partner's sense of self-worth.
And that one behavior.
That single behavior, that high-signal variable, it outweighed dozens of other factors like shared hobbies or financial stability. By focusing his observation only on these critical, behaviorally expressed variables, Gottman showed that thin slicing can find the simple, essential underlying patterns in even the most complex human phenomena.
So when you look across all these triumphs, the art expert spotting the fresh statue, Goldman's 3 risk factors, Gottman's laser focus on contempt, the common thread is undeniable. It's frugality. The value lies in reducing overwhelming complexity down to the essential, high-signal factors, allowing the expert's unconscious to perform optimally.
And this is exactly where we see the value proposition of modern decision support systems. The human adaptive unconscious excels at filtering, but we sometimes lose that ability under massive data flows. This is where Twin Labs really steps in. We work to mirror this expert human intuition by developing data models that prioritize signal over noise.
Preventing that analysis paralysis for executive teams.
Exactly. Our algorithms are designed to find the digital equivalent of Goldman's 3 risk factors, the minimum essential data needed to make the right call, and to make it instantly.
That synthesis of expert human filtering and algorithmic data reduction really is the goal, empowering the decision maker to blink reliably, but supported by data that is already focused and curated.
But this is where we have to transition to the sobering reality. The blink is not always reliable. As powerful as the adaptive unconscious is, it is also profoundly fallible. We have to address the duality of rapid cognition now and move into the pitfalls, the corruption of the blink moment.
The first major challenge, and it's a philosophical one, isn't even about inaccuracy. It's about opacity. The process itself is just inherently opaque.
That opacity is what Gladwell calls the locked door. The actual machinations, the decision pathways of our intuitive decisions are simply inaccessible to us. Vic Braden couldn't tell you the precise angle of the elbow that signaled the double fault.
Right.
The Getty experts couldn't initially articulate why the statue felt wrong. They just knew. But the how was locked away behind that door.
And what happens when we, as leaders, are pressed to justify those gut decisions, especially to, a skeptical board or a team?
We automatically encounter what he calls the storytelling problem. Because we cannot access the real unconscious influences driving the decision, humans instinctively construct plausible, but often entirely false assumptions and rationalizations to explain their choices after the fact.
We invent a story.
We invent a coherent narrative that makes sense to our conscious mind, regardless of the true unconscious drivers.
Wait a second. If the conscious explanation is often, for lack of a better word, a lie, doesn't that fundamentally undermine the entire value of executive debriefs, of lessons learned, performance reviews? How could we trust any retrospective analysis of a decision if the justifications are just plausible fictions?
It raises a profound issue for organizational learning. It really does. If I liked a job candidate because the sound of their voice triggered a positive unconscious association with a trusted mentor I once had, and I tell the hiring committee, I liked their answer about organizational change.
The articulated reason is meaningless.
It's meaningless. Decision makers need to be incredibly self-aware that the confident explanation they give for a gut feeling is often merely plausible, not necessarily true. This is why retrospective questioning about motivations so often fails to yield meaningful insights.
So that opacity, the locked door, makes us incredibly vulnerable to the second major failing, cognitive bias. The unconscious system that is supposed to filter reality accurately can instead filter it through a pre-existing damaging lens.
Unconscious prejudices and stereotypes are perhaps the most dangerous corruption of thin slicing. Gladwell explored this through the historical phenomenon he calls the Warren Harding error.
Warren Harding, a man whose primary qualification for the presidency was basically his appearance. He possessed this commanding, handsome presence, what people at the time literally described as presidential looks.
He was elected U.S. president largely because his physical attributes triggered these powerful, positive, unconscious associations in the electorate. the image of a leader. But despite being, by most accounts, intellectually mediocre and lacking substantial political achievements, the adaptive unconscious substituted appearance for substance.
And that's the core failure mode.
It is, judging an individual based solely on how they look or sound or are named, rather than on their actual competence or qualifications.
The science has now formalized this subconscious substitution with tools like the implicit association test, the IAT. Can you help us understand the IAT beyond just its results? How does it actually measure an attitude we don't even know we have?
The IAT is critical because it doesn't ask you what you think. It measures your response time latency. It forces you to rapidly categorize words like good or bad with demographic groups like male or female or different racial categories.
Okay.
If you take longer to pair the word good with a certain group than you do to pair good with the default majority group, that hesitation, that latency, indicates a pre-existing automatic implicit association.
So that latency reveals these deep-seated implicit attitudes, these automatic associations regarding race, gender, professional fields, that often completely contradict what we consciously state as our ethical beliefs.
And the real-world impact is massive and measurable. The research is just so clear on this. Job applicants with white-sounding names, even with similar qualifications, received a staggering 50% more interview invitations than those with black-sounding names.
50%.
50. And similarly, in fields like car sales, the IAT revealed that salesmen unconsciously stereotyped black and female shoppers as laydowns, as easy targets, basically. And they consistently quoted them higher initial prices despite consciously denying any prejudice.
So the blink failed. It failed because it relied on an ingrained, inaccurate stereotype that corrupted the thin slice of the interaction, rather than accurately reading the individual's intent or knowledge. It's a chilling demonstration of how our internal computer, the adaptive unconscious, can be corrupted by societal conditioning.
But bias isn't the only pitfall. Extreme environmental conditions can also break the system down entirely. And that's where stress comes in. The ability to thin slice effectively is severely impaired under conditions of high arousal and extreme stress.
And this leads to that catastrophic outcome known as temporary mind blindness.
Yes, the sudden, severe loss of our natural capacity to read intentions, microexpressions, and emotions in others.
The tragic case of Amadou Diallo really illustrates this physiological breakdown.
It does. In 1999, 4 NYPD officers working under intense pressure in a dark, high-crime environment encountered Diallo. They fundamentally misinterpreted him reaching for his wallet as a mortal threat reaching for a gun, and they opened fire, killing him.
And this wasn't necessarily a failure of training, at least not initially, but a failure of human physiology under duress. What is the specific mechanism of that breakdown?
The physiological data is precise. Extreme stress pushes the heart rate above 145 beats per minute. When that threshold is crossed, the body begins diverting resources away from complex motor skills and, crucially, away from the prefrontal cortex, where complex cognitive processing and perception reside.
So everything narrows.
Everything narrows. Vision narrows, leading to tunnel vision. Hearing narrows. And the ability to process novelty or complex emotional cues just shuts down.
So the officers stopped reading Diallo's face, which likely expressed terror and confusion, and instead their overstressed adaptive unconscious just defaulted to the most rigid, ingrained, and aggressive stereotype of a dangerous criminal. They lost the ability to thin slice his actual intentions.
They relied on the worst possible, most primitive version of their intuitive reaction. The entire encounter was over in a matter of seconds. The combination of the high-risk environment, the lack of time, and the sheer physiological stress subjected the officers to a complete failure mode of the blink. It really demonstrates that the effectiveness of thin slicing is so heavily dependent on maintaining an optimal state of arousal.
Which is nearly impossible under mortal threat unless you've been thoroughly trained for it.
Exactly.
This gives us the complete picture then. A high-powered, frugal decision engine that is essential for efficiency, but one that is simultaneously vulnerable to corruption by implicit bias and catastrophic failure under stress. The fundamental question for you, the modern decision maker, is now practical. How do we harness this power while mitigating these critical risks?
Well, the great promise of Blink is that snap judgments are not uncontrollable destiny. They can be educated and they can be controlled. So this second half of our deep dive is essentially a playbook for shaping the environment and structuring the training that influences your adaptive unconscious.
Okay, let's start with the fundamental building block. Action step 1. Cultivate deep domain expertise. We've established that intuition is built, not born, but How do we make that process systematic?
You need to move beyond simply accumulating experience, which can be random, and move towards acquiring profound, structured, domain-specific knowledge. This depth of experience is what provides the pattern database that allows you to be frugal and accurate in that blink moment.
It sounds a bit like saying just study harder. But you
Yeah.
mentioned the example of food tasters, which I think is a great model for turning this subjective instinct into something resilient and transferable.
It really is. I mean, take, for example, a professional coffee or wine taster. They don't just say, this tastes fine. They use a detailed lexicon, like the flavor wheel or the difference to scale to articulate, categorize, and verify their subjective sensory experiences.
They give it a language.
They give it a language. And this transformation, turning a simple, inarticulate intuition like, I don't like this, into a quantitative, conscious, and repeatable description like, this coffee is slightly astringent with notes of fermented stone fruit. That's how you formalize the gut feel.
So for an executive in finance or strategy, the equivalent would be developing a shared, detailed lexicon for warning signs or market indicators. One that allows the team to articulate and therefore test those first intuitive reactions to a new deal or a competitor's move.
Exactly right. It moves the conversation from, I just have a bad feeling about this, to, my accumulated database is flagging variable X because it aligns with failure pattern Y, which we've formalized as pre-diligence red flag 7. This transformation is also why massive case exposure is so essential in business schools or internal corporate training.
It's a low-risk way to build the database.
It's a crucial low-risk method for rapidly developing the pattern recognition necessary for thin slicing in a business context. It lets future leaders rapidly build their internal database without having to experience every single failure scenario in real time.
That makes the process of building intuition feel like a strategic corporate asset, not just some random personal gift. Okay, action step 2 tackles the bias problem head-on. Neutralize bias by controlling the environment. If the contents of our adaptive unconscious are corrupted by stereotypes, we have to control what the unconscious is allowed to see.
This is our direct response to the Warren Harding error. Decision makers must be hyper-vigilant against judging individuals or ideas based on superficial, irrelevant cues. And the most effective tool here is the introduction of screens.
And the classical music world provided the benchmark for this, right?
Yes. The success of blind auditions, where musicians performed behind a screen, immediately eliminated subconscious biases related to gender, race, or even physical attractiveness. It forced the evaluators to judge purely on talent and sound, and the results were dramatic.
The number of women in major orchestras skyrocketed.
It increased substantially after this change. So in high-stakes corporate assessment, removing potentially biasing visual or demographic information like masking names on CVs, or using structured, scoring-based interviews that prevent the interviewer from being swayed by charm, it protects the integrity of that crucial first impression.
That's applying the screen externally. But what about the internal antidote? If my IAT score indicates an implicit bias I don't consciously agree with, what can I do to shift that internal computer?
That's the concept of conscious override and inoculation. Gladwell notes that we can actively intervene to counter our own implicit biases. Research shows that if you consciously, deliberately expose your adaptive unconscious to strong, positive counterexamples, say, thinking about successful figures from minority groups, or reviewing diverse leadership case studies, it can temporarily but meaningfully shift the subconscious attitudes revealed by the IAT.
So it's hard work.
It's the hard work of aligning your automatic, unconscious actions with your conscious, ethical, and business values through deliberate, structured mental practice.
Okay, moving to action step 3. Embrace frugality and structured spontaneity. We saw the dangers of analysis paralysis. Now we need the playbook for overcoming it.
This step demands that executives challenge that deeply ingrained cultural bias that complexity equals quality. The optimal strategy requires balancing deliberate and instinctive thinking by actively filtering irrelevant data, the noise, to focus only on the essential factors, just like the Goldman algorithm taught us. Frugality is a discipline.
And how do you operationalize that discipline, especially when everyone in the corporate structure is incentivized to hoard data?
Well, leaders must mandate the identification of golden signals, the 5 to 7 variables that truly dictate success or failure in a specific project. This prevents the team from spending 80% of their time processing the 80% of data that doesn't actually matter. But the second part of this action step is about empowering fast action. It's structure for spontaneity.
This moves beyond simple delegation. This is about trust in the blink under fire.
It is, especially in fast-moving, high-stakes environments like military command or complex project rescues. We can use the example of General Paul Van Riper's approach. The leader provides clear, high-level intent, the mission objective, but crucially avoids overburdening subordinates with endless procedures, centralized controls, or excessive real-time information requests.
You give them freedom to operate.
You grant them the intellectual freedom to execute based on their rapid cognition and their initiative when the situation is unfolding too quickly for centralized deliberation.
So the trust in that spontaneous action is founded entirely on the prior expertise and the clear, simple, and restrictive structure you've provided up front. That's the psychological safety net.
Exactly. The structure provides the rails for the instinctive decision, ensuring that the spontaneous action is reliable because the parameters are clear and the noise has been removed.
That's a powerful lesson in decentralized leadership. Let's move to action step 4. Train for stress and interpret novelty. We saw the psychological failure at 145 beats per minute. How do we inoculate against that temporary mind blindness?
Stress inoculation is absolutely essential for any high-stress field. Continuous, high-fidelity training and simulation are necessary. For example, in fields like policing, military operations, or high-volume emergency medicine, repeated, realistic simulation allows experts to practice maintaining their functional capacity within that optimal range of arousal.
It helps mitigate the risk of catastrophic cognitive breakdown.
Yes, under pressure.
And this is a critical area where sophisticated technology provides a massive advantage. Immersive simulation environments, what we might call high-fidelity digital twins of operational contexts, they play a huge role in training the unconscious mind safely.
It absolutely accelerates the acquisition of the pattern database. The goal is training that hardwires the correct high-quality intuitive response, the appropriate level of force, the correct medical procedure, the correct response to a cyber threat, even when the clock is at zero and the stress levels are peaking.
So that addresses the stress side. Now let's address the second part of this, interpreting novelty. This deals with our first impressions of things, products, ideas, prototypes, rather than people.
Right. Decision makers must learn to interpret their first negative reactions rather than just taking them at face value. A crucial insight is that initial negative reactions to groundbreaking products or ideas may stem not from genuine dislike, but simply from unfamiliarity.
The distinction between ugly and different, the brain registers different as a potential threat, and that registers as a negative blink reaction.
Precisely. We see this with the initial launch of truly groundbreaking products, like the Aaron chair or unconventional music artists like Kenna, who received these wildly negative initial feedback reports that did not correlate with eventual commercial success.
Right.
Consumer research is often unreliable for predicting preferences for truly groundbreaking concepts because people struggle to articulate their reactions to the unusual. That initial feeling of "I hate it" might just be the adaptive unconscious flagging different, and you need to allow time and context for that unfamiliarity to dissipate before you scrap a potentially groundbreaking concept.
And we have to recognize that we don't evaluate these products in a vacuum. The context and the branding are everything, aren't they?
That's the concept of sensation transference. People do not evaluate products in isolation. Branding, packaging, history, and context profoundly influence the sensory experience itself. The classic failure of New Coke in the 1980s is the ultimate illustration.
They got the taste test right.
They did. The company focused only on the blind taste test of the liquid in isolation, ignoring the profound, positive, unconscious associations consumers had with the established Coke brand, its packaging, its history. Those unconscious associations were a vital, inseparable component of the perceived taste experience.
So if a new product feels wrong, the executive has to identify whether the negative intuition is reacting to the core functionality or merely the packaging, the branding, or the lack of history.
Yes. The expert's blink is sophisticated enough to detect a flaw in the product design itself, but it can be fooled by the presentation. You must consciously analyze the source of your intuitive reaction.
This entire framework for controlling the blink is incredibly useful for technology adoption, especially when you're dealing with AI-driven insights and digital transformation.
Right.
If we look at these 4 action steps, cultivating expertise, neutralizing bias, training for stress, and structured spontaneity, we can see how advanced technology supports the entire process.
Absolutely. The The structured data sets and high-fidelity simulation environments, the digital twins we mentioned, they help refine expertise and inoculate against stress far more efficiently than simple real-world exposure alone. These simulations help us push the boundaries of performance while maintaining that optimal arousal, effectively expanding the decision-maker's internal pattern database much faster.
And algorithms can be used to implement the screens we discussed. By filtering out those biasing cues in data assessment and ensuring that judgments are based purely on performance metrics, we can actively maintain objectivity. For example, a Twin Labs platform can enforce the use of the Goldman algorithm's frugality, preventing an executive from accidentally reintroducing noise into the system.
By focusing on these controls, decision makers can ensure their accumulated expertise, supported by objective, focused data from platforms like Twin Labs, is leveraged optimally. We are building technology not to replace intuition, but to augment it, to discipline it, and ultimately to prevent the corruption of the human blink. That is the fundamental value proposition of efficient decision-making today.
Okay, let's consolidate the key lessons we've uncovered in this deep dive into rapid cognition.
First, I think you have to remember that expertise is the precondition for reliable intuition. Your snap judgments are only trustworthy if they are built on years of structured exposure and practice. The art expert can thin slice because they've seen thousands of pieces of art. The executive can thin slice because they've processed hundreds of comparable cases.
Second, frugality often outperforms exhaustive analysis. More data is not always better. You have to be disciplined about filtering irrelevant noise, focusing instead on the essential high-signal factors, like Goldman's algorithm or Gottman's contempt, to prevent that cognitive decay caused by analysis paralysis.
And third, bias and stress are the primary pitfalls that must be mitigated by structure. Whether it's the Warren Harding error in an assessment or the risk of temporary mind blindness under pressure, we must actively impose structures, screens, simulations, conscious override, and clear intent to control the environment and train our adaptive unconscious to align with our highest values and organizational goals.
This has been an incredibly thorough examination of the power and the fragility of rapid cognition. It forces us to rethink how we value time and expertise in the modern decision cycle. The quality of a decision is fundamentally not proportional to the time spent making it.
Indeed, the book's enduring legacy is forcing leaders and individuals to confront the non-conscious mind and to acknowledge that our hidden biases and our physiological limits are just as important as our conscious capabilities.
So here is the final provocative thought for you to carry forward, building on everything we've discussed today. If the great power lies in the blink, how can you use your conscious deliberation, your slow, effortful, System 2 thinking, to identify the precise, high-stakes moments when your accumulated expertise grants you the necessary permission to stop thinking and confidently start acting? That balance between reflection and action is the ultimate goal of optimal decision hygiene. Thank you for joining us today. Visit the Twin Labs website for more business insights.